All right, so we've got some Wikipedia excerpts here about Christopher Columbus. You know, the whole explorer, discovered America kind of guy.
Yeah, it's interesting how that image of him is just stuck,
Yeah.
Like he just popped up and said, boom, here's America. It's a lot more complicated than that.
Right, and even his birth date is kind of fuzzy, isn't it? Like somewhere between August 25th and October 31st, 1451. We can't even get that straight.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what else is kind of hidden in the whole story. But here's the thing that always gets me. This guy who is so driven to explore the world, he wasn't some rich kid with a trust fund. He came from, well, pretty humble beginnings, to say the least.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, his dad was a wool weaver, and get this, he even ran a cheese stand in Genoa at one point.
Wait, the guy who wanted to sail across the ocean to find a new trade route started out at his dad's cheese stand? That's a career change.
Right. But here's the kicker. Columbus was mostly self-taught. He was hungry for knowledge, really dove into geography, astronomy, history.
Hmm.
He wasn't just some random guy with a boat.
Yeah, and you know what else says something about him? He was fluent in like a million languages. Ligurian, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Latin. The guy was a walking dictionary.
It's more than just the languages themselves, though, right? It's about immersing yourself in different cultures, ways of thinking.
So we've got this ambitious, multilingual, self-made scholar, but he also had a personal life. Married to Philippa, had kids, even had a mistress later on, Beatrice. It's easy to forget that these historical figures were real people.
For sure. But those personal details kind of get lost in the whole grand narrative of history. Speaking of which, how does a cheese stand worker's son from Genoa become so fixated on sailing west to get to the east? Seems a little backwards, doesn't it?
It's like looking at a map and saying, you know what, I'm going my own way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to really get what Columbus was thinking, we got to go back in time. It's 1453, Constantinople falls, which basically shuts down the Silk Road. That was the trade route for spices from the east. And spices, my friend, were like gold back then.
Yeah. So Europe was like, we need a new spice route stat. Anyone got any ideas? And Columbus was like, hold my astrolabe.
Right. And his big idea to sail west across the Atlantic, it wasn't as crazy as it sounds now. Like many educated folks back then, Columbus knew the Earth was round.
Okay, good. Just making sure we're all on the same page here.
Haha, exactly. But here's the thing. His calculations were, shall we say, a tad off. He underestimated the Earth's size, overestimated the size of, well, basically everything else. That westward trip looked a whole lot shorter on paper.
So he was working with some pretty iffy numbers, but wasn't there also that whole thing with the Toscanelli map? Wasn't that supposed to be the best information at the time?
Oh, absolutely. That map, it was based on Marco Polo's travels, but with some, let's call them creative interpretations of distances, definitely played a role in shaping Columbus's plan. Goes to show how even bad information can have a big impact.
Here's what blows my mind. Even with all that uncertainty, the guy was basically taking a shot in the dark. No GPS, no Google Maps, just, hey, I think there might be something that way.
Now, that's what I call venturing into the unknown. And that, my friend, is where things really start to get interesting. Because those voyages, they set off a whole chain of events that changed the world.
Okay, so those 4 famous voyages, each one is like its own chapter in this whole thing.
And each one had some pretty major consequences, too. It's not just about the adventure of it all.
Yeah, you're right. So Voyage 1, the one they teach you in school, 1492, 3 ships set sail, and wham! Hello, America.
Well, not exactly wham, and definitely not the mainland United States. He first landed in the Bahamas, October 12th, an island the natives called Guanahani, though he quickly renamed it San Salvador.
See, right there, that kind of highlights the issue with the whole discovery thing, doesn't it? He met the Taino people. They'd been there for ages.
Exactly.
Oh,
That's
so-
why you hear historians use pre-Columbian era.
Yeah.
Gotta acknowledge that the Americas weren't just empty space waiting for Europeans to show up.
Like walking into someone's house and being like, whoa, I discovered a house.
Pretty much. And that kind of attitude, like they had the right to just take over. It's a pattern with Columbus, unfortunately. You can even see it in his journals.
Wait, there are actual journals, like written by Columbus himself?
Yeah, they give you a real look into what he was thinking. Like, on that first day, October 12, 1492, he writes about the Taino people. He says, and I quote, "They should be good and intelligent servants, for I see that they say very quickly everything that is said to them. And I believe they would become Christians very easily, for it seemed to me that they had no religion."
Wow. Already talking about servants and converting them, not exactly a warm welcome.
And that sets the tone for a lot of what happens next.
Right. So voyages 2, 3, and 4. Give us the quick version. He sets up colonies, right? becomes a
Yes.
governor.
Voyage 2 is when he starts La Navidad, which, well, didn't last. Then comes La Isabela on Hispaniola, which is the Dominican Republic today. But it's not just about the settlements. It's that his power grows, he's governor now, and that leads to problems.
Problems with the native people.
Exactly. And that's when you start hearing those accusations of brutality, being a tyrant. That whole investigation by Francisco de Bobadilla.
Yeah, not exactly the poster boy for peaceful exploration. But is it possible those accusations were exaggerated? I mean, history is written by the victors, right?
That's the tough part about interpreting history, right?
Hmm.
Was it really anti-Italian feelings in the Spanish court? Or were these legitimate complaints about a guy who was in over his head? It's never simple.
So we've got a failing governorship, accusations. What happens to Columbus in all this?
His health goes downhill.
Hmm.
Probably reactive arthritis, if we're being specific, not just gout like people say. He's fighting for the rewards he thinks he deserves from Spain, but his name is mud.
And he dies in 1506, a much more complex figure than we usually make him out to be. So where does that leave his legacy?
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question.
Mm,
And it gets even more complicated.
more complicated. There's even more to his story.
Oh, yeah. Remember we talked about the Norse explorers? Turns out they were poking around North America way before Columbus.
Wait, what? You're saying Columbus wasn't the first European to reach the Americas?
Not even close. Leif Erikson and his crew were there around the year 1000. Even had a settlement at Lanceau Meadows in Canada now.
Wow. Okay, that kind of blows the whole Columbus discovered America thing out of the water.
Yeah.
So, if we're being real about it, what is his legacy? What impact did he actually have?
Well, even if he wasn't first, no doubt his voyages were a turning point. They kicked off this huge wave of Europeans heading to the Americas for good or bad.
And that's where the Columbian Exchange comes in, right? All that trading of stuff, plants, animals,
Good.
and the not so great part, diseases.
Exactly. Everyone talks about the tomatoes, potatoes, chocolate coming to Europe. Those are definite wins.
Yeah.
But we can't forget the downsides.
Yeah, like smallpox, measles, influenza, those diseases just tore through the native populations. They had no resistance.
It reminds you that even something that seems good can have some seriously bad side effects. Got to look at the whole picture.
So, how do we reconcile that? Columbus, the guy with the ambition to explore, but also the guy who set in motion this wave of destruction.
That's the question, isn't it? And it's not one with an easy answer. It's about understanding that history is messy.
Lots of gray areas, not just black and white.
Exactly. We can admire his guts, his sailing skills, but still say, hey, what followed was awful. The cultural exchange was huge, but there was a human cost.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, like trying to see all sides of an issue at once.
That's why we study history, right? It's not just dates and names. It's about asking those tough questions, seeing different sides of the story, and hopefully learning something from it all.
So, to everyone listening, if you take away one thing from this deep dive, it's this. Never stop questioning, never stop exploring. History is complicated, and that's okay. In fact, that's where the good stuff is.